Hello and welcome. As India struggles to come to terms with Tuesday's deadly Maoist assault on its security forces, how will the world's largest democracy tackle the growing challenge of its left-wing extremists? Maoist fighters ambushed and killed at least 75 troops of India's Central Reserve Police Force in a remote region of India's Jazeera state. That attack is the latest in a series of rebel strikes aimed at countering what has been called by the media Operation Green Hunt, India's biggest ever anti-Maoist offensive. The left-wing rebels claim they're fighting for the rights of impoverished tribes and rural poor, who they say have been marginalized by the government for decades. The Maoists are inspired by the ideology of the late Chinese leader Mao Zedong, who advocated the capture of political power through a rural revolt of poor, exploited farmers and landless workers. India's Maoist movement began 43 years ago with a violent peasant uprising in Naxalbari, a village in the eastern state of West Bengal, giving the often used name Naxalites to the rebels. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has called the insurgency India's greatest internal security challenge. Today we ask, how can India tackle the Maoist uprising without addressing its growing social and economic divisions? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we also welcome your phone calls on the show. I'm joined now from New Delhi by Shoma Chaudhary, executive editor of the Indian news magazine Tehelka.com. She writes regularly on the reasons behind the rise of Maoism in India. With her also in the Indian capital is Ajit Doval, the former chief of India's Intelligence Bureau. And on the phone from Goa is journalist and author Sudeep Chakravarti, who has spent time in Maoist strongholds and has written a book called Red Sun, Travels in Naxalite Country. I welcome all of you to the show. And Shoma Chaudhary, if I could start with you there and ask, what has prompted this recent surge in Maoist activity? Of course, it's been going on, but why this recent surge? Or is it simply a case of it being reported more?
Well, Riz, certainly the escalation of violence has been, it's about a 4 or 5 year old phenomenon when the government of Chhattisgarh raised something that we call the Salva Jurum, which roughly translates into the peace hunt, where they raised a kind of civil militia, tribes versus tribes, and they armed tribals in Chhattisgarh to fight the Maoists. This was backed by the state with, state arms, state money. What it resulted in was that the Salva Jurum went into the forest and they actually cleared 600 villages, which amounts to about 4 to 5 lakh people, Some of them were pushed into camps, the others just fled into the forest. There was a lot of burning and looting and rapes and, state atrocities really went up with this campaign. That really pushed ordinary tribals into the Maoist arms, and their cadres rose. So now what's really happened is that a kind of logic of violence has taken over, violence and counter-violence. Because of the Salva Jurum, Maoist violence, went up. The state then saw it as a greater security threat. Operation Green Hunt was launched. With Operation Green Hunt, the cycle of violence has just escalated like many-fold. The government itself will admit that in the last 4 years, the casualties have really gone up.
Now, I wonder, considering there's been hundreds of attacks and hundreds of deaths every year, this has been ongoing since the 60s, I wonder why it's been so off the world media's radar.
Well, to a large extent, Riz, because, the really big conflict zone in India is the conflict between the English-speaking urban middle class and the rural India, That this divide has really, again, got exacerbated since the 90s, when liberalization really took over. And a lot of this, it's not true that there hasn't been media attention, because in 2005, in Andhra Pradesh, there was talks between the Maoists and the government, and the talks broke down. And the Maoists were pretty much destroyed in Andhra Pradesh, and then they moved into the other areas, But to a large extent, there hasn't been focus on this because it is to do with the rural poor. They're not fashionable, they're not on the radar of anybody, they're not really fitting into the India shining story or the India growth story. And now there's media attention because it has escalated into violence, into large-scale deaths, and then there's use of security forces. So typically attention, middle class attention is now focused on it because it's something to do with national security,
Well, let's bring in Sudeep Chakravarti here and just ask, Sudeep, you've been through the Red Corridor, as it's called, the areas where many of the Maoists are active. And I wonder, what sense you get this issue has been poorly addressed by the Indian government and is now essentially coming back to haunt New Delhi?
I think that's very well put, Riz, and I think that cuts through the naivete that revolves around this issue altogether. The point is that very many people that I spoke to don't really give a damn about Mao Zedong. What they really care about is the fact that they live in a zone of non-governance or misgovernance or complete absence of justice of any form. And they really they want to address issues that are sort of enshrined in the cliches of the Indian Constitution, as it were. These people are really fighting for their rights, to put it in a very banal manner, but that's God's own truth. And when you travel through these areas, you sense what I would call vast pools of negative energy. Now, that is not only on account of a love for communism. It could be on account of being trodden and being mistreated, on account of caste issues, on account of being displaced because of big projects or extractive industries like mining. It could be simple corruption issues like a forest ranger preventing tribals who live in the forest from going about gathering forest produce, what is called minor forest produce, and taking bribes on to allow them to do that. Anger really builds up in small ways, but the Maoist rebels have sort of, in a way, leveraged this, what I would call these pools of negative energy, and not just in Chhattisgarh state.
Right.
It's in central India, it's in eastern India, it's spreading to the north, it's spreading to the south, and it's a matter of great concern, Riz.
Okay, I wonder how Tuesday's attack will change the way New Delhi approaches this issue, whether it will get a more comprehensive look at, including a look at the economics, as you've mentioned, the sort of issue of the downtrodden, not just the issue of the military challenge, which seems to be the prime focus right now.
Okay, very quickly, Riz. One is that I just want to make a quick point here, which is that when you talk about the economic issue, the fact is that this cycle of violence, or this cycle of Maoist rebellion or left-wing extremism, is really the fourth cycle since what you described as a peasant rebellion in the late 1960s. Now, with each cycle, left-wing extremism has become more acute. At the same time, India has become more progressive, more wealthy, in a way richer, forward-looking. So it's clearly that New Delhi has not learned its lessons. Successive administrations have not learned their lessons, and they've deepened the schisms that exist in Indian society. That's one. The second thing is that as to the outcome or the result of yesterday's attack, the fact is that it is merely the newest or the latest in the skirmishing. The figures are high, more than 70. But the fact is that New Delhi can't really do very much. The thing to keep in mind is that the Indian army has steadfastly refused to go into anti-Maoist operations, citing it as being a law and order situation and a socio-economic problem. So New Delhi really needs to address grassroots issues. It can't merely send in hundreds of thousands of paramilitary all across India. Round up.
Well, let me, Sudeep, I'll get back to you. I'll get back to you in just a second. Sudeep, I'll get back to you in just a second on some of these issues, just because I want to bring in Ajit Doval here. I'm glad to have you with us, sir. Of course, you had the role of being chief of India's intelligence bureau. Now, one thing, the Home Minister, P. Chidambaram, has said that there is no such thing as Operation Green Hunt, which is being reported in the media as, obviously this biggest anti-Maoist rebel reaction by the military of India. I wonder, first of all, if that's the case, that now there's a downplay in what's being done in these rural regions. And I wonder, to get your perspective on what the other guests have said here, on the need to address this in more than just a military way.
Well, firstly, I think he's very correct when he says that, well, there is no operation as Operation Green Hunt. We do not manage the security of this country in such a macro way that we say that we have got an operation in such a vast area. They are all localized. There are specific operations or there are specific tactical moves depending upon the information that is received and the response that is tailored for that. It's not something that we are doing it at a very massive scale in 13 states. That's number one. Now, secondly, coming to the point which have been made by the earlier interlocutors, let me tell one thing. There are two separate, there is a dynamics in two separate bands. One is the grievances of the people, and the grievances create conflict, and there are very many of them. In this count, we have gone wrong on two places. Firstly, the government has tried to find solutions for these problems, what they think are the right solutions. but not what the people want and the people think is the solution that they are wanting. So, on the developmental side, I think what we need to address is to find out what exactly the people want to happen, in what way we can deliver them what they are in need of it, and not the standard models of growth or development that we may have in mind. That is the one in the one tier of it. The second part of it is that the Maoists who have got a totally political agenda, they are there to, they are trying to gain the power through armed rebellion, through an armed movement, drawing their inspiration from a totally discarded and a discredited ideology of Maoism or communism of that variety. Now, they are exploiting these local grievances, telling the people two things, that your grievances are genuine, we are with you, which is the first lie that they are telling. They are not with them. If there is anyone today who is interested in perpetuating the poverty of these people, saying that there is a higher alienation level from the government in pursuit of their political agenda, it is the Maoists. They are the one who will try. And
Ajit, I'm going to Mr. Doval, Ajit, I'm going to ask you to pause.
You start making a road.
Sir, right. So sorry, I'm going to ask you to pause only because we've got a satellite delay there. We have to take a very short break, but I want to get more of your points and those of the other guests in just a moment. Please don't go away. We're back with more of our discussion on this in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're discussing the impact of recent violent attacks by Maoist rebels in India and how they tie into India's unprecedented economic growth over the past few years. Many believe the influence of the Maoists has grown in impoverished areas of the country because of a feeling that the economic boom has bypassed the rural poor. Well, with me discussing that is Shoma Chaudhary, the executive editor of Indian news magazine Tehelka.com. She's in New Delhi, along with Ajit Doval, the former chief of India's Intelligence Bureau. And with us on the phone from Goa is journalist and author Sudeep Chakravarti, who's travelled extensively through Maoist territory in India. And Shoma Chaudhary, I want to get back to you actually here with an email question we had from a viewer by the name of Sajid Khan, who says pretty much what's being said at the beginning of the show. The Maoist movement is a result of social and political injustice in India. Now, of course, that is how it's being portrayed as well, as we've spoken, but it seems it's not just the rural poor that support the Maoist rebels, is it? There's also some degree of support from some of the wealthy members of society. So what is the basic underlying factor for their involvement?
You know, Riz, I think this is a much more complex sort of phenomenon than is really made out in the media, you know, and I think there's in fact very little understanding about it certainly in urban circles. You know, there's a very thin stream of a sort of thin skein of Maoist ideologues, you know, who are really fighting a very politically motivated battle because they believe in a different form of government, a different form of political organization. And, you know, there are a lot of idealistic, I'd say, middle class people. That's what happened in the Naxalbari, for instance, which was all urban middle class young men and women who really went into the peasant areas and tried to create a political consciousness, you know. But today, when Mr. Doval is right that it is a complex thing because the Indian state usually foregrounds the fact that the Maoist confrontation is about overtaking state power by 2050, I think is what their ideal is, you know. But what really makes this very complicated is that the cadres of the Maoists are really tribals, Dalits, the poorest of the poor, who may have been, you know, made politically aware by the Maoists. But I'm not sure that they're really fighting an ideological battle, you know. They are fighting really for survival. They're fighting against the worst and most venal face of the Indian state. And this is not something that urban India understands. You were asking what is the impact of yesterday's attacks. If you were listening to television discussions in India, if you looked at the newspapers this morning, you know, all of the English media, there's a kind of hysteria taking over this country, you know. The models being discussed is the extermination of the Maoists and the tribals in the same way as the LTT has been exterminated. There's talk of bringing in aerial unmanned vehicles, of strafing the countryside the way Pakistan is doing. You know, there's a sense of being under siege. And this talk of development
let me
is
do one
purely
thing.
lip service. That is what is so disturbing, you know. I think the fact is that
let me
almost
bring in-
every
let
government
me-
functionary you'll speak to, certainly
Shoma?
Mr. Chidambaram.
No, sorry, it's just sorry, we're battling a satellite delay here, but I wanted to bring in Sudeep and just do one thing. I'll get to some of your points only because we're tight for time. I want to try and get everyone involved in this. And Sudeep, we're going to show our viewers a map of India, which shows some of the areas most affected where the Maoists are active. The first part shows the areas in which you have travelled through, and the territory extends through these other areas that we're seeing now. The eastern state of West Bengal, through Bihar, Chhattisgarh, we've got Jharkhand, Orissa and Andhra Pradesh. Traveling through these areas, when you were going through them, what did you find was the most relevant issue? What resonated most with these people, and to what degree do they feel that the development of India, the sort of economic boom, has passed them by?
People were not talking about economic boom, Riz. They were talking about self-respect and dignity. I know these sound like, again, these may sound like cliches and sort of overblown words, but that's really what they were talking about. When a mining industry sets up business in their forests, they are of course affected. I mean, the same way as a person in the Brazilian rainforest is. In this particular case, what they want, what they're really looking for, is respect for their land, respect for their livelihood, and if they were to be resettled, to be rehabilitated properly as well. Now, that's where the problem comes in, because very often business is conjoined with government and bureaucratic policies, and that's where the corruption happens, and these people are simply booted out, and they lose their livelihood and sense of self. I'm giving you one tiny example, which is relevant for the states of Orissa, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh in particular, because these are very natural resource-rich states, very rich in iron ore, manganese, coal, diamond, gold, you name it. In the case of West Bengal, it is a case of land rights. In the case of Bihar, it's primarily caste-related issues. In the state of Uttarakhand, which borders Nepal and Tibet, it is again related to alienation over land and issues of caste. So it's basically alienation, a sense of resentment.
Interesting, yeah, interesting mix.
That's what people.
Let me do one thing. Let me bring in Ajit. Let me bring in Ajit Doval here with a question, sir, for you that came in from one of our viewers, if I could. This came in from Ali Nasser Abdurrahman, who says, India's military force cannot stop the growing Maoist insurgency. Now, I mean, I want your assessment on that, but also the idea that these Maoists appear very well trained in guerrilla warfare, and that there's speculation they're well armed, well financed. There's speculation that they may actually be armed by forces outside India, that there is a broader agenda here, which isn't just an internal issue.
Firstly, let me tell you that I don't think, to me it appears to be very, very unlikely that Indian state will use its armed forces. And I don't think that they should use it, and I don't think there is anyone who subscribes to this view. Neither I think the problem is of that magnitude. It is a bad event. An incident can take place, and when the casualties are high, it essentially is the tactical setback. The field craft used, the weapons used, the position, where they were, and the explosives, probably they had the higher casualties. But event by itself is not something which changes the strategic positions of a nation, how it is going to respond to a threat like this. This is, as I think Sudeep Chakravarti is very rightly brought out. I think he has just put it on this thing. People here are looking for the dignity, for their self-dignity, for their way of life that they want to preserve. They feel wronged and a sense of injustice. And as Shoma said, it's not so much for a Maoist ideology or for what the Maoist leaders want to take the power by 2040 or 2050. Now, the point is this, that as far as India's coercive arm of the state is concerned, how India is going to maintain this thing, the rule of law has got to be maintained. That is the message that the government of India definitely will carry to the people.
Now,
because you
Mr.
cannot
Doval,
do any
could these forces be?
change.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. Sorry, sir. I'm just asking. Could these forces be? These Maoist forces be armed and trained, perhaps by outside forces from outside India?
I don't have any information. The government may have some information, but I don't think that presently there is any indication, at least in the public domain, that there are some external linkages. They have got external ideological linkages, but we are not aware of other linkages. But if you say that the level of tactical perfection, the level of weaponization, training, has it gone very high? I don't think. I still feel that just because few incidents have taken place, it doesn't give me an impression that this has become totally an unmanageable threat, and it has got the level where we have got to really respond in large numbers and with very high weapons or with air power or with this thing. It is not that. We have got to address the problems of the people, and we have to maintain the rule of law. And we have got to maintain it with fairness, with compassion, with the rule of law. And exactly the way that the rule of law
just a quick, I just want to get one quick
to the government as much as to the rebel.
Sorry, sir, we're battling the satellite delay here, but Sudeep, just a minute to go. I just want to get your perspective on the guy who is the sort of the main leader of the Maoist rebels, Koteshwar Rao, known as Kishanji. Have you ever come across him in your travels, and to what degree is he a gelling force that holds together this group, if you like? Just a quick thought.
Well, he's not the chief. He's a senior person. The chief is a gentleman called Ganapati. That's a nom de guerre. It means people's leader, a guy called Muppala Lakshman Rao. Koteshwar Rao is a very senior leader of this Communist Party of India, Maoist. Unfortunately, I did not meet him in my travels, but well, he is very free with his mobile number and his contacts. So, you know, it is possible to be in touch with him, and many of us have. The thing is that he is definitely a force and a face in the eastern part of the movement. The thing is that while it is a Communist Party of India Maoist, operationally they work in various zones in the east, in the north, and it's not like armed movement everywhere. Some places it's propaganda, in the propaganda stage, some places it's in the seeding of the militia stage, in some cases it's all-out war.
I have to stop you there, Sudeep. Sudeep, I'm sorry, I have to stop you there because we're run out of time, but this is the unfortunate thing. More to discuss. Hopefully we'll get back to this topic. I want to thank all three of you for joining us for this and adding to the debate there now. And thank you, our viewers, for being with us too. Remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified on upcoming shows, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, is the marketplace better at predicting outcomes than so-called experts? What about for sporting events, elections, or maybe even a terrorist attack? People are now making money by trading on the predictions market. But is it accurate, and how ethical is it? Be sure to tune in for that. We'll see you next time.